It's MRC TV's public service announcement with Brittany Hughes and Eric Shiner.
Welcome to the MRC TV podcast. I'm Eric Shiner.
I'm Brittany Hughes. Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday. Hump Day. It's time for your Wednesday public service announcement, as we do every Wednesday. And all kinds of fun stuff to talk about today.
I'm actually really excited about this one. We've got some really, I mean, and it's kind of rare when you get this close to Christmas, but some interesting stuff has actually really gone down this week, and we're only halfway through the week. So I'm excited about this one. We've got some cool stuff.
All right, so let's kick it off with the big thing. Everyone's talking about the big meeting of the minds, Donald Trump, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, all gathering together at the White House now to discuss the border wall. Now, first of all, I want to say one thing that I think Trump did very well. I'm going to give him credit, and I don't think enough people are talking about this, is he decided to let the cameras in on this meeting.
I think that's the most important part of this, actually.
I think if they had this meeting privately, I mean, the media is going to say that Chuck and Nancy dominated and made Trump look like a fool. In fact, I'm already hearing that, although I would disagree from the video that I've watched.
I agree with you.
That's what occurred, but that's the way the media is painting it. If it happened behind closed doors, the media would paint it the exact same way, but we wouldn't have had the privilege of actually seeing what happened and judging for ourselves. And I'll tell you what, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi looked super uncomfortable and really disturbed, minds blown at the end. At the end, when everything wrapped up, they looked like they were rattled.
Well, they're not used to this, and this is something that I think Trump does very well. Again, whether you like what he says all the time or how he says it, that's, debatable. Some people do, some people don't. But one thing you have to agree with is he tends to say exactly what he thinks, again, whether you agree with him or not, and he really puts it out there. And I think there's a sense of authenticity to that a lot of his supporters like, and they like that it's not this, faux presentation of politics as usual where, you go and you have these backdoor conversations and then you come out and you say things that you think people are going to want to hear, and it all kind of seems like smoke and mirrors. He's willing to have conversations like this, live in full view of the press so that the public can really see what people actually think, not what they discuss and then how they decide to spin it later on. This was so, and I don't know if this is the right way to put this because it's a very serious subject. It's one that deserves serious answers, so I'm not trying to minimize it, but this was so entertaining to watch. It was really revealing, and I've come up with a new nickname for Nancy Pelosi. I'm going to take a Trump tack on this one.
I have a long list, so
I mean,
you can add
we'll add this one.
A lot of them are unspeakable.
What do you think about it? You think Squirmin' Nancy would ever catch on? Because that's exactly what she did. She's sitting on the couch in the Oval Office, just almost unable to sit still because she's so uncomfortable that Trump is making her defend her lack of support for a border wall and border security that we desperately need in front of the cameras without being able to, go and fix up her messaging beforehand. She was so uncomfortable. Chuck Schumer was so uncomfortable that he barely said 2 words.
He just stared off. I don't know if there was something interesting on the wall, but if you watch, even when he's talking to President Trump, he's staring at a wall. Like, he rarely made eye contact. It was very interesting. The only time they made eye contact is when they got heated, when Trump actually said, hey, you know what? This is an issue, border security, that I'm willing to shut down the government for. I'm willing to own it. I think people want border security. Most of Americans are on board with border security. And if you won't give it to us, then yeah, we'll shut down the government.
You know something?
You've said it.
Okay, you want to put that on my...
You said it.
I'll take it.
Okay, good.
You know what I'll say? Yes. If we don't get what we want, one way or the other, whether it's through you, through a military, through anything you want to call, I will shut down the government.
Okay,
absolutely.
fair enough.
And I am proud, and I'll tell you what,
disagree.
I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck, because the people of this country don't want criminals and people that have lots of problems and drugs pouring into our country. So I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it. The last time you shut it down, it didn't work. I will take the mantle of shutting down. And I'm going to shut it down for border
But we
security.
believe you shouldn't shut it down.
Well, and did you notice, too, how the liberal media spun that particular moment? Because I kept seeing over and over again, Chuck Schumer really, he really did that on purpose, and that was part of his strategy to get Trump on the record saying that he would shut down the government over this issue so that when, if and when that does happen, the blame blame will be put squarely on Trump and squarely on Republicans, and there will be no mistaking who's responsible for that. And I actually really disagree with that. I guess that's, if you want to see it that way, I can't stop you. I mean, that's the way that a lot of people are going to see it no matter what. But I actually see it as the opposite. Trump was putting Democrats on the record right there, live in front of the cameras, in that moment, as him saying, look, we've got something. We've got something that we desperately need. A lot of Americans support this. We've got a lot of votes in the House. This is something that this is the chief campaign promise that I was elected to fulfill. And you guys are saying that you will not give us the votes for this. You're going to be responsible for a government shutdown. So I disagree that this was some big moment where Trump is now responsible for shutting down the government. He's not shutting it, first of all, we've got to see whether he even does or not.
You mentioned the votes. Did you see Nancy Pelosi argue with Trump over the votes? Well, you have the House, and that's not how it works, Nancy. I need 10 Democrats in the Senate. And she just argued with them over that.
There are no votes in the House, a majority of votes, for a wall, no matter where you start.
Exactly right. You don't have if I needed the votes for the wall in the House, I would have them in one session.
Well,
would be done.
Go do it.
It doesn't help because we need 10 Democrats in the Senate.
Don't put it on the Senate. Put it on the negotiation.
Okay, let me ask you this, and we're doing this in a very friendly manner. It doesn't help for me to take a vote in the House where I will win easily with the Republicans.
You will not win.
It doesn't help to take that vote because I'm not going to get the vote of the Senate.
The
I need 10 senators. That's the problem.
Well, here was the really interesting thing, and I put it in the piece that I wrote yesterday for MRC TV. One of the most interesting quotes from her directly that, he said, I need 10 votes from the Senate to make this happen. He understands that he does not have that much of a majority in the Senate. And he said that, and she responds, quote, don't put it on the Senate, put it on a negotiation. First of all, what does that even mean? A negotiation for what? And what she's essentially saying is, don't hold the Senate's feet to the fire here, even though you're right, that is exactly what you need to get this done, and he recognizes that. Put it on a negotiation because that's all the Democrats want here. They don't want to actually reach a resolution. They don't want to actually make a decision. They want to go around and around the mulberry bush on this. And she knows that, Democrats are going to take the House in January, but the Republicans still hold the Senate. They still hold the White House, and you're going to have a stalemate over these issues. And she doesn't want to actually come to a resolution. She wants to keep going round and around. So when she just keeps saying, put it on a negotiation, but then she doesn't set any terms for, okay, we might be willing to talk about this if blah, blah, blah over here. She knows she's not. There's no negotiation that he's going to be able to put up that she's going to be willing to accept. She knows that.
Well, they don't want that. They just want to continue the funding as is without the border wall. And,
absolutely.
And Chuck Schumer said as much during that meeting. He put it out there. The other one thing I have to note before we get out of this topic is afterwards, Nancy Pelosi says that, Trump won't let go of the wall. It's somehow connected to his manhood. She makes this kind of comment.
She has said that before.
And then she's like he would know anything about manhood. Why is everything about being sexist, about being racist? You can't be interested in having a wall and border security unless it's somehow connected to your manhood when you're president of the United States.
I kind of want to know why, because this is not the first time she said that. I kind of want to know why Nancy Pelosi is so obsessed with Trump's manhood, because apparently she can't stop talking about it. But it's going to be interesting to see, and it already has been interesting to see how the media has spun this, because frankly, it just shows that they're so incredibly two-faced. They're still taking up for Democrats on this issue. They're still using it to slam Trump, even though it was the Democrats in the room who wanted to kick the media out and not involve them in the conversation.
No transparency, no interest in transparency.
But Trump is the enemy of the media, right? He's the one that invites the cameras into the room.
It was so smart of him to invite the cameras in the room.
But he's the real enemy of the press.
Because otherwise we would have just gotten the sound bites that we talked about, that you heard on all the broadcast media, Trump just saying, I'll shut down the government if I don't get what I want, end of quote. But because it was all live and there's social media, which is a great outlet
Well, I watched it on Twitter.
Yeah, a lot of people watched it live. We got to know the full context of what exactly was said there and what was going on.
And if you're a member of the media, you should appreciate that. Regardless of where you fall politically, whenever a politician says we should have this discussion without the media present and then come out and discuss it, as a reporter, that should be an instant red flag to you, no matter which side of the room says it. So again, it's just interesting that, they'll slam Trump for wanting to, he's actually been very open with the media. And I find that very, very two-faced. Of course, they're not coming after Nancy Pelosi for saying that. And I don't expect them to.
No, they won't. They won't go after Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. They'll definitely go after Trump. But again, we all got to see it on social media, and that's also will bring us to our next topic, the Google meeting.
The Google
meeting with congressional lawmakers, talking about potential bias, some political activity that's going on. They had the Google boss Sundar Pichai. Their interesting hearing, especially from Jim Jordan. I caught
a lot of it. Did have to take a break for some of the other things that were going on, so I didn't watch the entire thing live. I will say, if I can start off with maybe one little piece of helpful criticism that I think is important to note, and I think sometimes it's worth noting how these things are handled and maybe how we could handle them better in the future. I think one of the biggest challenges when it comes to big tech and answering questions of censorship and, really getting into holding their feet to the fire, there were a lot of members of Congress on both sides, that I feel like really struggle with the basics of how the internet works. And I don't say that. I'm trying not to be disrespectful.
No, I agree. No, that goes on both sides of the House. I think it's both parties. Sometimes they don't understand the differences between a Snapchat, an Instagram, and a Facebook, and you'll see them put all those together. Sometimes when they do these hearings, and they'll ask about one when they really mean the other. And there needs to be a lot of clarity.
And that's hard. Look, I'm 30 years old. I grew up in the age of tech. I was one of the first Facebook users back when it was limited to only college kids.
Your age?
Well, 30's not too bad. I've come to accept 30. I've come to accept 30. Touch and go for a little while.
A lot of women don't talk about their age.
It's okay. I'm 30.
Asked it of you there. All right.
It's okay. I can take that.
We've established it.
I am bold. I am bold, brave, and beautiful. It's fine. I'm good with that. I understand that tech is difficult to keep up with, so I get that. And so I'm not trying to say it disrespectfully. I'm not trying to say that, every single congressperson needs to come to the table with a thorough knowledge of the ins and outs of tech. But I do think that it is a factor that complicates these conversations, because when you're trying to talk about the nuances of search algorithms or ways that things pop up and who determines what rises to the top and what doesn't, I think you really have to have an in-depth understanding. And I think that big tech companies know that Congress and governing bodies don't have that. And I think it's a way that they kind of get around having to answer a lot of questions because of that. So I think it's something that moving forward, this is not the last time we're going to see this issue. It's certainly not the last time we're going to have issues of censorship or issues of bias in big tech companies that claim to be unbiased. And I think it's something that we're going to need to figure out how to address that moving forward, because we can't just keep going around and around. I mean, these congressional hearings are interesting, but unless they move the ball forward and result in something, really, what's the point? It's a bunch of hours of talking. So,
well, one of the things I want to circle back to what I mentioned, the conversation with Jim Jordan was very interesting, because it wasn't about any aspect of tech specifically. It was about an email, and it was an email sent out by Eliana Murillo. She's Google's head of multicultural marketing. It came out right after the election. She talked that they helped work to get Latinos out to vote for Hillary, but not enough. And they talked about the efforts and the money that was put in to get the Latino out to vote. And the key phrase was at the end of this email, in key states. And boy, Jim Jordan was not letting Pichai get off easy on that question.
Now that makes everything different. So I got really just one question for you. Why? Why did Google configure its features and pay for rides to the polls to get out the Latino vote only in key states?
Congressman, as I said earlier, we found no evidence to substantiate those claims. The only effort we do around elections.
So your head of multicultural marketing, who you praised her work in this email, gave her a shout out, was lying when she said you were trying to get out the Latino vote in key states?
We today, in the U.S., around elections, we make it, and this is what users look to us for, where to register to vote, where to find your nearest polling place, what are the hours they are open, and we do those things effectively.
I appreciate that, Mr. Pichai. And I already said that's being a good corporate citizen. What I'm asking is, why did you only do it in key states?
We didn't do any such activity as Google on any of these key states. I mean, there are employees. I think
Did you push to get out the Latino vote in all states?
As Google, we don't have goals around pushing out to get any particular segment. We don't participate in partisan activities. We engage with both campaigns. We support and sponsor debates across both sides of the aisle, and we provide users with information to get to elections.
Your head of multicultural marketing said you were pushing to get out the Latino vote, paying for a ride to the polls for the Latino vote only in key states, and you're saying that's not accurate.
Yes, that's right. We haven't found any evidence to substantiate any.
So she just made it up out of thin air the day after the election and wrote this email to your top executives, and it's not true?
Congressman, I'm happy to follow up, but I think the employees today do their own activities.
We don't want the follow-up. I want the real answers right here in this committee.
And have you noticed that particularly with Google and a little bit with Twitter and Facebook as well, when their CEOs have had to sit in these hearings, but particularly with Google, there have been a number of internal emails that have been leaked. I know Tucker Carlson has really been all over this and has covered a lot of it.
He's done a great job.
You know, and a lot of leaked internal emails talking about changing search results for things like immigration and the Muslim ban and trying to weed out what Google deems as bias, which of course is subjective. What do you mean by bias? And then, you know, top officials at Google complaining that Hillary lost the election and that maybe Google had something to do with that, and that maybe they need to limit the number of results that pop up from quote unquote fake news. And of course, in their list of fake news, there are conservative websites like Breitbart, like the Daily Caller, places like that. You know, so what do you mean by fake
CNN.
news? But of course, no, never CNN, never MSNBC.
They never take down their incorrect story, but okay.
You know, and so those are the questions that I think really need to be answered. But you notice that Google's answer to that is always, well, we looked into it and we didn't see any evidence that it happened. And we're just supposed to take their word for it that it just quote unquote didn't happen, even though tons of their top officials are talking about it.
That's the whole issue, though, with social media censorship on the whole. I don't think, you know, most Republicans would say, you know, we don't want the government to be regulating Twitter, but there's got to be some form of transparency, and there's not currently in how they decide these things. They just say, well, we looked into it, and that's good enough. We don't want the government to get in and regulate these large companies, and we don't want them telling them what to do because that could hurt free speech. I think that's a legitimate argument, and I think most Republicans would say we don't really want to get into regulating social media too much. At the same time, a request for transparency and saying, well, how do you look at this and how do you judge? Because these are such great, huge platforms, and because if they decide that they don't want you to put out a pro-life message, as you know, as Marsha Blackburn has claimed during the campaign, if they don't want that, they can halt your First Amendment right. They have the ability to limit it on their platform, on a platform that they say is all about free speech. So you can't have it both ways without the transparency, and I think that's the ultimate goal. And then we get to the second question of the censorship, and a hysterical moment was Democrat Jared Nadler coming out and saying that, you know, it's all claims of conservative bias. It's made up. It doesn't exist.
And even if Google were deliberately discriminating against conservative viewpoints, just as Fox News and Sinclair Broadcasting and conservative talk radio hosts like Rush Limbaugh discriminate against liberal points of view,
that's not the same thing.
Well, you know what? And this is where it comes into government. This is where it ties back into government regulation. First of all, we have to admit that Jared Nadler's biggest contributor for his campaigns for office is Google, the Alphabet Corps. So you got to take
conflict of interest.
Yeah, there might be a little conflict of interest in this conversation. Two, if we have the FCC that governs broadcast. So the government does actually regulate television broadcasts and radio broadcasts. So comparing the internet to television and radio probably wasn't the wisest choice to make your argument.
That's why you can't have a nip slip on the Super Bowl, but you could have it on the internet. It's a different thing. It's a different thing. I'm not naming names here. I'm just saying it's a different thing. All I'm saying, you know, I've said this before. I actually said this when I was on Cheddar TV this week, talking about this issue. Look, I am not one for sweeping government regulations. I feel like, you know, for conservatives to, you know, to get their hair raised over an issue and to immediately demand government regulations, I think is very dangerous. It kind of goes against a lot of our founding principles here. But it's not a regulation to suggest that if these platforms are going to start changing searches or limiting tweets or limiting posts or you know, not being just open platforms that are driven by speech and driven by searches and driven by customers. If they're going to start picking and choosing what they're going to put out and what they're not going to allow, you become an editorial platform. You become an editorial, just like MRC TV is, okay? We are an editorial platform. We do not pretend to be anything other than what we are. It's right there in the front. We are a conservative media watchdog. That's what we do. But we can be sued for libel, because we put information out there. We are the ones that actually create the content, and we determine what goes on our platform and what doesn't. If Twitter and Google and Facebook, if they don't want to just be open platforms, if they want to start picking and choosing, then they need to be regulated just like an editorial platform, and they need to be subject to the legal ramifications of that. And I don't think that's unfair to ask them to choose, what are you going to be, an editorial platform or an open platform? Pick one. And there needs to be some transparency that proves we are an open platform.
And I think that's the big issue, is what's the transparency? When you have these accusations and the answer is simply, we looked into it and we decided there is none. Well, what did you do? What are the goalposts that have to hit for you to decide to take something down? What was the thought process behind it? You have to be willing to answer those questions, and they're not. And
there's, I mean, come on. We're not so stupid as to believe, this is Google here. They've got data that can back up their claims if their claims are true. Okay, it's provable whether or not they're changing things and whether things are being lifted to the top.
But
and
they
whether
researched it and they determined that it's not there, so they don't need to show any of it to you. That's their
I trust them about like I trust the government when they say that, well, we looked into it and it just didn't happen.
All right, we're running out of time. One more thing I want to touch upon is your story. You know a lot more on this. Is this Virginia teacher didn't want to use a student's preferred pronoun when the student wasn't even around, and therefore loses their job. Explain this to me.
Oh my goodness. So this is it's only going to get worse, and we've written stories like this before, and I feel like they're only popping up more and more often. So this comes out of West Point, Virginia. It's West Point High School, not West Point Academy, where, you know, different. West Point High School in West Point, Virginia, a 47-year-old French teacher whose name was Peter, I believe it's Vlaming is how you pronounce his last name, was fired for insubordination because he had a female student who was in his class the year before, who identified as a female and presented as a female, who apparently decided over the summer, heading into this school year, that she was now going to be a he. So shows up to school this year as a boy, and this French teacher apparently has not been accused of, you know, using the, you know, quote unquote wrong pronoun, so calling this young lady still a young lady in front of her or to her face, but apparently continued to refer to her as a her in conversations with other people, like other faculty and staff, right? And then apparently there was one slip up where this young lady was actually about to run into a wall. And I guess just a knee-jerk reaction, the French teacher was like, oh, somebody stop her, instead of somebody stop him. And that ended up getting written down as an incident. So apparently was confronted about this, and he claimed, look, I'm not calling her a her to her face. I'm not trying to insult her to her face, but I'm a Christian. I don't believe in this. And, you know, I'm not going to just go along to get along with this. So the school board fired him for it, and now
you believe in science? What is the science you believe in?
The only thing that would make it funnier,
you believe someone born with a gender is a certain gender? You believe the DNA? You believe in the science? You are exiled.
The only thing that would make this funnier, if he were a biology teacher, I think that would just add a different level of irony on it. But so the other thing too that's important to note here is, first of all, he's got a lawyer. They are thinking about potentially going to court over this.
I hope they do.
Because his argument is, look, I have a constitutional right to not be forced to say things that go against my beliefs and my conscience. I don't have to say things I don't believe in. According to the record, there was absolutely no complaints that he had been doing this to this young woman's face. Again, who is still a young woman, regardless of what she believes. One more point here on this story that I found to be the most interesting point. Students this week, or last week rather, actually held a walkout on Friday. Students at this West Point High School held a walkout on Friday in support of the teacher. And a lot of them were saying, look, we're not saying that we don't support this student or that we're trying to bully her or anything, but we think that it's absolutely ridiculous that this teacher, who's been here for a long time, who is a fantastic teacher, everybody likes him, speaks highly of him, we think it's ridiculous that he was fired for something like this, basically for not conforming to what the state essentially wanted him to do.
Especially when he's referring to a student that he knew the year before as a female.
So I think it's really interesting that high school students were rallying in support of the teacher and his rights. That's just an interesting twist.
It'd be really interesting to hear what students from there have to say. If you're out there and you're a student, please send us an email. And last week, as we wrap things up, we're running out of time. We're running tight here. I do want to mention, we talked about speaking of gender issues, the resolution in Michigan to not let fast food places give out gender identifiable toys. I guess they don't want to have a girl's toy and a boy's toy. It's just a toy because there's nothing better going on. We said, hey, anyone out there this was in Michigan, anyone out there in Michigan that is dealing with this, please give us your reaction. So I want to give a quick, Connie sent us this email. Connie, we thank you. She loves our post. She resides in Michigan, and she says she's dumbfounded that our lawmakers are trying to push gender-neutral toys. It is it's the most important necessity out here. Our roads are crap, in her words. We have unfinished projects because of labor union disputes. We've had 6 more doctors arrested because of prescription and opioids and Medicare fraud. And Detroit schools haven't recovered from the greedy hands of principals and contractors. But this? Gender toys? That's where their attention is? I'm disgusted. That's my opinion.
Watch out for the Happy Meals, guys. That's what's ruining our lives, is the Happy Meals.
So, Mike, if you hand out the wrong Happy Meal, could you possibly lose your job?
You will be fired.
I mean, look at what's going on in Virginia.
It's a wonder any of us even walk out our doors these days. At this point, it's just getting ridiculous. I don't even.
All right, well, the doors are closing, the windows are closing, we are out of time. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the MRC TV podcast. Public service announcement. I'm Eric Scheiner.
I'm Brittany Hughes, and we will see you next time.